The Dragon's Return, Chapter 27, The Secret Sharer, Part 3. Getting out of the mines was less complex than Merlin had thought it would be. Only once they were away from where Morgana lay unconscious did she even slightly relax and whirl on Alator and the guard that had fought with Gawain. "Why do this?" she demanded, her anger flaring white-hot, making the trees around her shake without wind. Alator knelt, his guard dropping to his knees as well. "My lady, we needed to find you. It will be vital in the days yet to come that you have contact with we, the Catha," he said. Merlin frowned. "The Catha?" she asked. He nodded. "We are the priests of the old religion. Our duty is to defend old knowledge and ancient truths, to assist in the completion of prophecies as needed. I am here to pledge our assistance to you," he said, laying down his staff in front of her. "Not a great start, abducting my uncle at the behest of Morgana," Merlin snapped. "The witch was a means to an end. No true harm was done to your uncle. I did not know who he was." "That should not matter. We do not hurt innocents. This type of behavior is what drives others to fear. This sort of thing is what's making changing the laws more difficult," Merlin said, shaking her head. "Then they are changing," Alator said, his voice just above a whisper, hope gleaming in his eyes. "They are. I know change has been slow to come, but if we do not wish Albion to tear itself apart, then these things must be done right," she insisted. "How may we be of service?" Alator asked, looking up at her with a look that made her pause. It was the same look young knights gave Arthur when he knighted them. They were interrupted by the sound of hooves. All of them raised hands, ready to defend against a threat. Merlin lowered hers first, as she spotted Lancelot's horse, with him atop it. "Merlin!" he called out, pulling his horse to a stop. Alator acted, a wave of power sending Lancelot flying from his saddle. "No!" Merlin cried out. Her eyes flashed gold and the trees moved, catching hold of Lancelot before he could come crashing to the ground. He groaned in minor pain. "You attack my friends and family again, and I will end you here and now." Merlin snapped at Alator, who knelt back to the ground. "You all right, Lancelot?" she called as the trees set the knight back on his feet. "I'm all right. Not sure I like your new friend," he said, straightening. "You are looking for answers for how to help bring about the time of Albion," Merlin said, ignoring Lancelot's raised eyebrow at that. "It is all we have ever wished for, Emrys," Alator said, bowing his head. "Then you need a lesson in kindness, in thinking before you act. Seek out Isildir of the Druids. He will share with you what you need to know," Merlin instructed as she mounted her horse. "Perhaps he will teach you the art of subtlety as well." Alator nodded. "If you ever have need of us, break this," Alator said, reaching into a pocket in his robes and holding out a pendant to Merlin. She took it almost reluctantly. "We believe in you, Emrys, and will waylay the witch however we can. None who trade with us will help her in her quest." Lancelot remounted his horse, and the two of them left the Catha in the clearing. "Are you going to tell me what all of that was about? And why he called you Emrys? I know that's what Arthur thinks the druid girl's name is, but he said it differently, as though you were..." Lancelot floundered. How to say that Alator had looked and spoken to Merlin the way he'd seen priests regard images of their gods in his travels around the kingdoms. She put her heels into her horse without answering his question, but the look on her face was pensive. She did not speak, even after they arrived back in Camelot. It took near 2 weeks for Gaius to fully recover. Merlin barely left his side. However, one night, about a week later, she slipped into Arthur's rooms as Peter set down the tray that carried their dinner. "Peter, please take the night off," Merlin said, and Peter nodded, used to this by now. He bowed to both of them and left, Merlin flicked the lock into place after him, and Arthur sat up straight. She systematically made sure the windows were closed. She only did that when she had something to tell him. Arthur, I've not been fully honest with you, and I think it's necessary that you know everything, or at least everything I know. She began pacing. Arthur frowned. She was wearing her bag. She stopped and pulled a folded cloth out of it. Perhaps it might be easier just to show you? She paused. I need you to listen to me before you say anything. Promise me.
What else could there possibly be, Merlin?
Arthur asked, his tone playful. The smile fell away as she did not return it.
Whatever it is, I will listen, I swear.
She nodded and unfurled the cloth. A set of brown druid's robes. He frowned. Familiar, brown, druid's robes. She swung them over her shoulders, and Arthur blinked as her features shifted, all but her eyes. Before him stood the elusive druid girl, Emrys. He stood, and Merlin, Emrys, inched backward.
You were a druid the whole time?
He asked. She shook her head. It's a bit complicated, I'm afraid, she said, pulling off the robe. It's a bit complicated, I'm afraid, she said, pulling off the robes and setting them aside. I once told you that magic was a crime I had no choice in. I didn't lie. I told you the story of my birth, but I never knew why. Why I was born with magic, why it's been as easy as breathing for me since I was an infant. Not until I came to Camelot. She sat down in the nearest chair. Arthur remained standing. I told you I had been speaking to the dragon long before I released him. Kilgara called out to me my first few days in Camelot. He was the one who told me why I was born this way. The druids call me Emrys. She looked away from him, fiddling with the edge of her outer corset. They hold to a prophecy, one that concerns the return of magic, the uniting of all 5 kingdoms, a golden age of peace. She fell silent, and Arthur, thinking she was finished, spoke up.
They believe you will bring this,
he said. Not me, us. They call you the once and future king, she said, looking up at him with a slight smile. I was born because of you. My power exists because of you. Arthur stepped over to her.
Why tell me now? Why wait?
I didn't want to burden you further. Knowledge of the prophecy has done me little good over the years, except to keep me here in the first few weeks, she said, and Arthur frowned.
You stayed because of this prophecy,
he asked. Well, back then you were still an ass. If you'll recall, in the first few weeks we knew each other, you insinuated I was a bedwarmer by asking about my ability to walk on my knees. I think I had good reason to consider leaving. Merlin laughed. As Arthur went bright red, he pulled a face and gently reached out to cup her cheek.
I'm glad you didn't,
he said, and Merlin's smile grew brighter. As am I, she said. She leaned forward and kissed him. He pulled back first and frowned slightly.
Does this have something to do with Gaius?
He asked. Morgana had taken him so she could discover the identity of Emrys. Merlin said, reaching out and folding her druid's robes back into her bag. She got nothing from him, but only because the man she hired was looking for me for his own purposes, not hers. Arthur stiffened at that.
Why? Should we be out looking for him?
He asked. Merlin took his hand. No, it's all right. He meant well, he just wasn't great at the execution. I've sent him to someone who can teach him that, Merlin said, smiling.
The druid you brought to try and heal my father? Isildur, right?
Arthur asked. Merlin nodded. Arthur pulled her into another kiss.
This does not change anything. Not for me. You are and always will be my Merlin, and I love you no matter what.
he whispered against her mouth. She smiled and pulled him back in.